Yeah, I woke up Sunday morning and I was excited to not have to really do anything up until the Super Bowl, and then I rolled over and I grabbed my phone, and the first thing I see is a report from Adam Schefter that the 49ers have given Deebo Samuel permission to seek a trade. It was a conversation that Samuel and Kyle Shanahan had at their exit meeting at the end of this year. Samuel going into 2025 would be the final year on the 3-year deal he signed with the 49ers in 2022. So, um, I I don't like I don't think he's good. Good. I don't. This is the right thing to happen. Like, this is a logical thing to happen. I was gonna say I wasn't surprised. I was a little bit surprised though. So I didn't want to act like, oh, I knew this was coming. But at the same time, like, this is just the logical step in the life cycle of a player like Deebo Samuel, who doesn't appear to be aging particularly gracefully. He's going into the final year of his contract. He wants one more uh, wants to try and get one more significant deal before he turns 30. The 49ers are probably not super interested in giving it to him. So he's going to go try and get that elsewhere. Like, that all lines up and makes sense. I was still a little bit surprised though that it came out this way.
It was a little bit surprising with the context of what John Lynch said at his end of season press conference when he reiterated that he expected Deebo Samuel to be part of the team in
Mm-hmm.
2025, which was surprising when he said it. But I guess it's less surprising given, it's one of those things where actions mean more than words, right? Like, teams will tell you what they're thinking with how they operate more so than what they say in press conferences, which is just part of what this is, right? Like, we just have to factor in that what's said in press conferences isn't always the actual truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's the truth that the team wants to put out there. And John Lynch, I think, very clearly wasn't going to say, yeah, we're shopping Deebo, just because teams try to hold on to as much leverage as they possibly can at all times. For
Mm-hmm.
me, yeah, it's not surprising. I think this was always sort of the logical conclusion, particularly given the lack of production the 49ers got from Deebo Samuel last year, given, the weight issues, conditioning issues, injury issues, the fact that Deebo is kind of a one-note player at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
even that note hasn't been particularly strong, like being the bubble screen, running game, gadget, however you want to say it, receiver. He hasn't been as productive as he was in 2021. And
Mm-hmm.
when he does align in the backfield, he's what's kind of interesting about the way when the 49ers use him out of the backfield, it's like he's either getting the ball or not really doing anything, right? It wasn't like Deebo Samuel was this like dynamic, like line him up in the backfield, create a mismatch with the linebacker, and he's going to run routes. It was like, all right, it's going to be a fake to him, and he's going to kind of hang out in the flat and not do anything, or he's getting the
Right.
ball on a running play.
Right.
And it just never felt nearly as dynamic as it did in 2021. And yeah, he had a really nice game in Miami at the end of the season, but it just kind of felt like going back to last year's Super Bowl against the Chiefs when the Chiefs really had no issue covering him. And it was clear the 49ers were just kind of struggling to beat man-to-man coverage. Deebo wasn't going to be a guy who was going to stick around long-term in that context. And then you draft Ricky Pearsall, who the whole idea when you draft him is he's really good against man-to-man coverage. Ricky Pearsall, had didn't produce much his rookie season for a lot of understandable reasons, right? Including
Mm-hmm.
getting shot before week one.
Sure.
Um, so I think the upshot here, if you want to go bigger picture, is that the 49ers at some point, while they are going to try to keep their Super Bowl window with their current group of veterans open for as long as they can,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately they're going to have to get younger. They just have
Yep.
to. Like, Brock Purdy's going to be on an expensive contract starting this offseason. And you're going to have to reshape the roster and transition to younger players.
Yep.
And that means you're going to have some difficult decisions. And, some of those decisions are going to include Charvarius Ward potentially, and maybe Dre Greenlaw and Javon Hargrave, right? Like, those decisions already seem to be in motion in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like moving those guys out, bringing younger guys in, and Deebo Samuel is under that umbrella. And I think, given his lack of production last year, I think this is the right path.
Yeah, man. It was really clear their offense was reliant on Deebo Samuel being effective in the ways we're used to seeing him be effective. That's creating yards after the catch, it's breaking tackles in the run game, and kind of striking fear into defenses when he lined up in the backfield or when he went into a jet motion or that orbit motion where he goes behind the quarterback in the shotgun and then loops back around the other way. And I just don't think defenses were reacting the same ways that they used to. And when you're Kyle Shanahan and you're building out a play based on, okay, when Deebo does this linebacker is going to do this, and it's going to displace this safety, and this route's going to be open. When you don't have that anymore, you're going to struggle a little bit. So I thought they had to be less Deebo centric to begin with, and this is just like you said. This is kind of the way that goes. Just to put some numbers on it, his yards after catch per reception were the lowest of his career last year at 8.2. For reference, in 2021, he was at 10.8. So down more than 2.5 yards after catch per reception. His yards per route run, an efficiency metric from Pro Football Focus, 1.6, the lowest mark of his career. He forced 15 missed tackles. Forced 33 missed tackles last year on receptions, and those numbers flesh out about the same way as a runner. He just doesn't. He didn't break tackles the same way. He didn't create yards after catch the same way, and he's not like a separator. He's not this dynamic pass catching receiver. We've said it since Brandon Ayuk's rookie year. Like, hey, Brandon Ayuk might be the best like pure wide receiver on the team, and you saw it. You mentioned the Super Bowl last year. You saw it throughout this year. It felt like every catch Deebo made, there was somebody right in his hip pocket, and that's just not. If he sticks around this year, it's not like, oh my God, what are they going to do with that guy? He sucks, but he's not a player that's going to be part of the future for them moving forward. If he's going to age this way, if the Niners can get something for him,
yeah, which I think is the next part of this conversation is like, are they even going to get anything for him worthwhile in a trade? Because a team getting him is trading for the last year of his contract. And everything you just laid out would indicate that he's a declining player. And, do they want to not only give up an asset, but pay Deebo? Like, to me, this seems like a situation where it's more likely he's just going to get flat out released and a team can pick him up for nothing rather than a team giving the 49ers, a day 3 pick. At least that's my opinion. What's going to happen? I mean, there could be a team like the Cowboys who, we remember gave up a 4th round pick for Trey Lance. Like maybe the Cowboys will want to do that. But otherwise, like, to me, a smart process, if you're a GM looking to bring in Deebo Samuel, you're not giving up really anything of value to go get him when you could potentially just get him on the open market and sign him to a cheaper contract than what he'll be making in 2025 as it currently stands. So if I were to guess what's going to happen, I would say Deebo gets released. And yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow because if he's released without a June 1st designation or a post June 1st designation, it'll be about a $30 million cap hit, which sounds like a lot. And it's a tough scene for sure. And if it's a post June 1 designation, then it's 10 this year and about $20 million next year. To me, and we were talking about this with Nick Wagner too, our favorite cast member. Shout out to him who's done a bunch of reporting on this. But to me, it sounds like the best thing to do is, I mean, you're probably just going to bite the bullet and not even do a post June 1 designation and take all of the $30 million in dead cap hit this year, while Brock Purdy's new contract is at its lowest possible cap number.
Yeah.
Because if you do push this down the road, then you're looking at, a $20 million cap hit at like next year. That could be really onerous, where you just say, look, let's just get it over with this year, bite the bullet.
Right.
We got to do it. And the thing that's always worth remembering with dead cap money, that money's gone. It's a sunk cost. It's like driving a new car off the lot and your car diminishing in value. Just because you drove your car off the lot and it diminished in value, if it breaks and you need a new car, you go get a new car regardless, right? Like there's no there's no, you don't look at it and base your decision making off the future of your vehicle because you drove it off the lot and it diminished in value. Every single car that you buy new off a lot is going to diminish in value once you buy it. So that's sort of how I look at dead cap money. It's like it is what it is. Like it's already accounted for. You're not getting any of that back. You can't really operate like make all your decisions based off of, oh, this is a dead cap number. Like that money's already gone and spent. So
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
Niners, I think there's, I mean, if you're really, if you're going to make a high priced addition and really want to maximize what the roster could be this year, I guess you can justify doing a post June 1 designation and saying, we'll take the $10 million cap hit this year and then push the remaining 20 to next year. But I also think there's plenty of logic to just saying, let's just eat it all in 2025. And so we can be done with it in 2026 when Brock Purdy's probably going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, and that's a decision they're going to have to make pretty quick here. I
Yeah.
think March 14th is when the new league year opens. Um, and I think you're going to want to be operating in free agency knowing exactly what you're dealing with Deebo. Um, yeah, man, I don't know, given the nature of Brock Purdy's contract situation, like you said, I don't know what the impetus would be behind making him a post June 1 cut. And just kicking more money down the road. Especially when, and we're going to get into talking about the draft here in a little bit, but if you're trying to go younger anyways, you're going to have a bunch of cheap contracts coming in this year. You're going to have several starters who are still on their rookie deals. Now seems like the best time to kind of just clean all that out at once instead of doing what they did with D Ford, where D Ford was still on their books up until like last year.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think the least likely outcome is that Deebo Samuel's on the team.
Yeah, I think that would be to me a very toxic scenario.
I would agree. If you're having the conversation already of like he wants out and he wants a new contract and the Niners aren't going to give it to him, making him play out the final year of his contract is probably not super conducive to getting where you want to go between the lines.
Yeah. And you're going to want to get Ricky Pearsall reps.
Mm-hmm.
Jawan Jennings has obviously proven that he deserves playing time and targets.
Mm-hmm.
And, who knows when Brandon Ayuk will be healthy. But to me, this is a scenario where Deebo's probably gone. You go into the season with Jawan Jennings and Pearsall as your projected 1-2. You take a wait and see approach on Brandon Ayuk, who might not be ready to play until midway through the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then you draft a receiver or two, maybe day 2 or day 3.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring in a veteran. I haven't taken a look at the list of free agent receivers, but, whatever the equivalent of Robert Woods, for example, would be, right, like somebody maybe past their prime, but somebody reliable, somebody who can block, familiar with the system. Like to me, that makes more sense than trying to force it with Deebo, because if Deebo's here, I think you're going to have a hard time justifying, like Deebo's not playing special teams beyond returning kicks, right? So you're not,
right.
and he's not going to be a happy camper if Ricky Pearsall's getting all the playing time over him. So I just don't really see a scenario where it's tenable to have Deebo on the roster.
Get ready to learn Van Jefferson, buddy.
Right. Exactly. Like somebody like that is who I'm talking about as like a $5 million, so you bring him in for 2 years, $10 million, $5 million receiver, and somebody who, if he has to start a game, you don't feel terrible about it. But obviously not somebody who you're like building around.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, we've had this discussion before on the podcast, but receiver was a kind of a sneaky need to begin with. Now, if you're removing Deebo Samuel from the equation, I mean, every player you just named has a pretty significant question mark outside of Jawan Jennings.
Yeah,
like Jacob Cowing, no idea. Ricky Pearsall, you have what you think is an idea, but I mean, year 2 could be hell. We saw it with Dante Pettis. So, yeah, man, they got to figure that out.
Agreed.
Did you watch the Super Bowl?
Boy, did I. Stuck through that whole thing. The flu went through the household this past week. So we did not participate in a Super Bowl party like it sounds like you did.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, shindig.
the significant other and myself watched together, and wasn't as exciting of a game as I thought it would be. I thought it would be a lot closer than it was, and I think I discounted how banged up Kansas City's offensive line was and how much of a mismatch that would be against the Eagles' defensive front.
Yeah, I had the Chiefs winning 24-20. And I thought I was being pretty generous with like, all right, the Eagles defense is going to have a good day. But I think the Chiefs defense is also going to have a good day. And in a close game, I'm taking the Chiefs. And then it did not. The Chiefs defense did not have a good day. Their offense had a worse day.
And we're so like colored by 49ers Chiefs analysis. Like even in the two Super Bowls that the 49ers and Chiefs played against each other, it felt pretty similarly to this one going into it, where the analysis was like, you look at the rosters and do all the position groups. The Niners are probably the better team 1 through 53 than the Chiefs were, but the Chiefs had Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs could do it in the biggest moments, and you had complete trust in them. And that was kind of similar. Like I went into it thinking like, well, yeah, the Eagles are the more talented team, and you want to go through position by position. You say, yeah, the Eagles are more talented than the Chiefs, but the Chiefs just have those dudes. And that was the same analysis that applied to the Niners games. The difference was this was a lot more like the COVID Super Bowl when the Chiefs just couldn't block Tampa Bay's pass rushers.
Right.
And that ultimately ended up defining the game in the same way that this one did.
Yeah.
And I think the lesson for the Niners is, like, it sort of, to me, it reinforces what their ethos has already been, is that like you need to be dominant along your defensive front. Like that's clearly what it has to be for them. I know you made the point about the offensive line, which we can talk about. I think the Niners offensive line is probably league average with Trent Williams. Without Trent Williams, it's probably below average. The Chiefs playing, Joe Thuney, a left guard at left tackle. I mean, the Chiefs are not. It was not a league average offensive line. So I don't think
undrafted rookie. I think at left guard.
Right. Like I think if Kyle Shanahan's watching that game, his mind is going to, man, we got to get our defensive line back to something similar to what the Eagles are doing right now, which is what the Niners had in 2019. I don't think Kyle Shanahan looked at it and been like, oh, our offensive line is close to what the Chiefs have right now. We need to reinforce our offensive line. I think it sort of reinforced what he already believed, if I were to guess how Kyle Shanahan viewed it, if that makes sense.
Interesting. You're probably right, because I don't think Kyle Shanahan is down to have his mind changed about football that much. But but I do wonder because if you want to go back to the Super Bowl, it's like that road's going to go through Philly, or at least it looks like it as of now.
Yeah.
And is whatever group the 49ers are throwing out there this year, are they doing any better against Philly's defensive line? Probably not. So
Trent Williams would be better than Joe Thuney.
Yeah, you would expect that, but is Jake Brendel better than Creed Humphrey?
No.
And so that's where like they need a new starting left guard. And I've said I kind of think maybe Spencer Burford can play there. Maybe it's Ben Barch, where they can sign one of those guys Burford's still on the roster, but you can re-sign Ben Barch for super cheap and just have a competition there, have a legit competition at left guard, and hopefully find a quality starting player there. But you got to figure it out at center, because Jake Brendel's just not good enough. Dominic Pooney looks like a player at right guard, and then Colton McKivitz held his own as at right tackle, but I don't think that means they should rule out trying to find an upgrade there. Like that's what that's the, I think, quote unquote change I would like to see him make, because they're not going to change their philosophy on paying offensive linemen. Like they're not Trey Smith, Kansas City's right guard. Didn't have a great game yesterday, but has been a really good player. They're not just going to go break the bank to sign him and have him. But on the other hand, what I think I would like to see him do is maybe it's you sign Ben Barch and maybe you have Spencer Burford in competition at left guard, and then maybe you're drafting a center and bringing in a veteran center and doing the same thing at tackle. Spend a couple of late round picks at tackle and just have legit competitions, because I don't think they've done that, and they haven't really been able to, because it was specifically last year because of injury. But they were just handing out starting spots in 2023. It's like McKivitz is the right tackle and Burford's the right guard, and that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work. So that's what I'm interested to see, is if not necessarily investing high draft picks or more money at those positions, and more just fostering more competition to see if you can't piece together a better offensive line that can hold up in a way that's not going to have a 54% pressure rate on no blitzes.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah, this is not going to be like groundbreaking analysis that people are like. We can talk about the 49ers changing their philosophy and investing more premium resources in this position or that position. I don't think necessarily their philosophy needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
I think executing their philosophy just needs to improve. Right? Like,
okay. That's fair. I think, that's fair.
You know what I mean? Like, Cam Jurgens was, I think, a 3rd round pick,
mm-hmm.
right? And he's turned into a really good player for them along their offensive line. The thing with the Eagles, it's not like, oh, they've invested only premium resources in their offensive line and not, or in the defensive line and not the offensive line. It's like, no, they still have Lane Johnson. They have Cam Jurgens. They took,
mm-hmm.
Jordan Mailata is a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Mekhi Becton turned into a good player for them, moving him from left tackle where he failed with the Jets to like a good right guard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the point I'm trying to make is the Eagles were really, really good on both lines, and it wasn't really a philosophical thing for them. It was just like they just hit on a bunch of good players, whether they were 1st round picks or 3rd or 4th round picks.
Yeah.
Or free agent acquisitions. Like the Niners just need to add more. I don't think they need to shift their philosophy. I think they just need to be better at implementing it.
Okay.
And I think there's so much focus on the defensive line. It's like, no, the Eagles clearly prove that, yes, putting premium resources along your defensive front works if you're drafting dudes. Like, you know what I mean? Like Jordan Davis is not Javon Kinlaw, or,
mm-hmm.
Carter is not Javon Kinlaw, right? Like the Niners clearly whiffed on Solomon Thomas. They clearly whiffed on Javon Kinlaw. Drake Jackson has not turned into a player for them. I think that's probably more to injury than just like, I don't think Drake Jackson is like a talentless dude. I think it's more that injuries really cost him. And so I would just say, like, I don't think the 49ers need to like completely rethink their philosophy. I just think they need to draft good players. Yes.
No, that's fair. That's fair enough.
Getting dudes along the defensive front. We just learned on Sunday that getting dudes along your defensive front can, in fact, help you win Super Bowls and beat Patrick Mahomes. But you have to get those dudes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think I don't want to overcomplicate it.
No, so I think we're saying the same thing. I think they have a better opportunity to do that if they. I think if they invest not necessarily better resources, but more resources on offensive linemen, they think can actually compete for jobs, like starting jobs, or just take a guy like Jordan Mailata is an awesome offensive lineman who got into the NFL via the International Pathway Program.
Yeah,
like that's where, and he's just big and athletic. Like he's 6'8". He's huge. And to me, yeah, and right. And to me, go find a big dude who's athletic and see what happens. And I know that sounds so like rudimentary, and I know there's so much more to offensive line play. I'm not trying to like minimize how much skill goes into playing along the offensive line, But to me, I would rather see them throw late round picks at that than wide receivers and running backs.
Yeah, sure.
And see if
I
he
mean,
can figure it out that way.
that's what Trent Baalke did with Trent Brown, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like Trent Brown was
The 49ers hired Trent Baalke?
no, no. But when they drafted Trent Brown, God, I forget what year it was. What was it, 2016? He was a
Something like
seventh
that.
round pick, but you're like, God, this guy's 6'8" with like 40-inch arms. And then he ends up being like a really good player under certain circumstances, but a player who made a lot of money in the league. The Niners moved off him because he wasn't a culture fit, and they moved off him the same time they drafted Mike McGlinchey to play right tackle. But I think that like the theory behind, or the philosophy behind drafting Trent Brown in the 7th round whenever they did is in line with what you're talking about. Like, take a shot on athletic tools late in the draft and see if you can coach him into the player you need him to be, rather than completely dismissing the idea because you're like, well, we don't think he's going to start.
Yeah.
The Niners do this thing, I will say, a fair critique of the way they look at draft picks is like, can this guy start for us right now? No. Okay, we're not going to draft him. Right? Like you ask them, like being in those press conferences during the draft and asking them, hey, like, 2018, classic example. We've referenced this a lot. Why didn't you guys draft an edge rusher? You had a clear needed edge rusher. Their answer was, well, we didn't think there was anybody that we could have drafted that would have beat out Cassius Marsh. Right? Which, I mean, we can go through it.
Which is insane.
Sure, right. We can go through it, and I'm sure it's probably not true that like none of the players drafted in the mid rounds of 2018 or even early on could have beaten out Cassius Marsh. But I think they viewed that with the offensive line last year. Like, why didn't you draft anybody earlier than round 3? It's like, well, we didn't think anybody was starter. Like, I don't even think they drafted Dominic Pooney thinking he was going to start right away.
Yeah.
I think they just felt that there was value there. But like, they look at it like, all right, if we draft this guy, can he impact our team right away? And sometimes I think that's, like, it's along the lines of like drafting or avoiding players because of what they can't do instead of really emphasizing what they can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Kyle Shanahan, I think, generally is glass half empty when it comes to prospects.
I would agree.
And that, I think, has harmed him in the sense of like costing him, this guy didn't do this thing in college, and therefore we don't think he can do it at the next level. It's like, well, sometimes those guys can. And sometimes if you take a shot on a tackle in the 2nd round, maybe he can develop into a player that you like. And just because he's not going to beat out, Colt McKivitz in year 1 or whatever, which is just something they think that they don't know to necessarily be true, but that's what they think. I think that has led to Kyle Shanahan. Like, I think that's a fair critique of the way he looks at draft prospects.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Jumping over to the defensive line, we've talked about this a little bit before, but watching the Eagles' defensive line dominate the way they did makes it's it looked like the 49ers in 2019 had that same type of group. It was Nick Bosa, it was DeForest Buckner, it was Eric Armstead, it was Dee Ford, and it was just relentless. And I forget some of the reserves they had. But they were just relentless for 4 quarters, and you were getting fresh Nick Bosa and fresh DeForest Buckner and fresh Eric Armstead and Dee Ford well into these games. And it was just a nightmare for offenses. It's why I look at the Myles Garrett thing and why I wouldn't hesitate to send out 2 first-round picks, because you're adding a player who and I know that there's financial stuff, but follow me on just the kind of philosophy here. A player that is the best or one of the 2 or 3 best pass rushers in the league. He's 29 years old, and you're filling maybe the biggest need on your roster is improving the pass rush. And you're getting a guy who's done it at an all-pro level and at a DPOY level, a defensive player of the year level. And that's why it would just be a no-brainer for me. It wouldn't necessarily be that for just anybody, but he's that good. And if you're making that move, and again, I don't know if financially they really could, but if you were making that type of move, you're going to take that type of swing. It makes sense to me, because it changes the bar for everything else that you need defensively.
So I largely agree. And if Myles Garrett is content with playing out the final 2 years of his current contract,
Which he's probably not.
which he's probably not, I just like I think on its face, yeah. If you can get Myles Garrett for 11, I don't know if I would give up 2 firsts, but if you could get Myles Garrett on his current contract for pick number 11, I would probably do it. My hang up is I would not give up 2 firsts. And I think if he is in fact on the trade market, I just think getting a potential Hall of Famer in his prime is going to, like, so many teams are going to be in the mix, I think. And that, like, what's the price going to be in a trade at that point? And if you're the Niners, the way I look at it, like, they built themselves into a contender because of the star players that they drafted. And when you look at how expensive the roster is, the best way for them to keep the championship window open is to continue drafting stars. Like, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And when you look at the NFL now, and you look at the fact that it's a 17-game regular season, only one team in each conference gets the bye, going with a player who's 30 this year, 31 next year, while, Myles Garrett is the elite of the elite, I worry about having it, like, adding to the overall age of your roster and the miles of your roster. Like, at some point, the 49ers need to infuse this team with another draft class like they did in 2019, where a large part of their success was due to the fact that Deebo Samuel, like, you had George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Dre Greenlaw, Nick Bosa, who else? Just all these guys on rookie contracts. That was why they were so successful. And that core has maintained itself at a high level, obviously before this past season. But at some point, you need to re-inject your roster with those types of players. And I think you're sacrificing a lot of potential draft capital if the trade market is going to be what I think it's going to be for Myles Garrett, which is why I'm probably not giving up 2 firsts. And I would, if I'm Myles Garrett's representatives, like, he's Clutch Sports. Like, I have a hard time believing that Myles Garrett is going to get traded and not demand a new contract instantly, given he's only signed through 2026. Right. So what's that?
That helps explain why he's asking out too.
Right.
He doesn't want to sign a new deal with the sinking ship that is the Cleveland Browns.
So if you're the Niners, like, you're going to give up, 2 first-round picks and also make Myles Garrett, like, give him the same contract that Nick Bosa has over the next 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Like, that to me is a really difficult needle to thread, while also factoring in, like, you have depth issues. You, at some point, are going to have to pivot off George Kittle, Fred Warner. Like, you have Brock Purdy making $50-60 million a year, whatever it's going to be. Like, the appeal, the curb appeal of adding Myles Garrett to this team, obviously there. It makes a ton of sense when you just look at what this team needs. Getting a dominant player to play on opposite Nick Bosa would be an incredible coup for this team. But in terms of, like, the process and continuing to build out this roster, to me, they have to just draft as many good young players as they can, because they're on affordable contracts. And that's how you sort of got to this place you're at to begin with. And I think you're accelerating your decline ultimately if you invest, multiple first-round picks and another big contract to Myles Garrett.
Sure.
That said, if you win the Super Bowl next year and Jed York gets to lift the Lombardi Trophy midfield at Levi's Stadium, maybe that's worth going in the tank for the next 5 years, right? Maybe that's worth the Niners.
Sure.
But to me, I think what the Eagles just showed is like, no, you get as a ton of elite players on rookie contracts, which is what the 49ers did in 2019. That's your
Mm-hmm.
best avenue towards sustained contention. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, I would get Myles Garrett if it's one first round pick and you don't have to give him a new contract immediately. But if it's multiple firsts and you have to pay him, I'm probably passing because I think you can get a good player at 11 that might help you. Maybe not 100% the way Myles Garrett does, but maybe 80%. And he's making, 5% of what Garrett gets. You know what I'm saying?
wow. If you get 80% of Myles Garrett, you've got a DPOY candidate. I have some concerns, and I don't necessarily like.
Micah
I
Parsons was the
agree. I
12th
don't.
pick in his draft.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
You know?
It's not about where players are available. It's I have, and it's a little bit of a different front office because Adam Peters left. And the first draft class post Adam Peters looks decent with Pearsall and Renardo Green and Pooney and Malik Mustafa. Isaac Arendo can play a little bit. So the first draft class is okay, but here are the defensive line picks since Nick Bosa. So Nick Bosa was a layup in 2019. They traded DeForest Buckner to draft Javon Kinlaw. In 2021, they did not draft a defensive lineman. In 2022, Drake Jackson in the second round, Kalia Davis in the sixth round. In 2023, Robert Beal in the fifth round. That's what they've done to bolster their defensive line via the draft with young, like, cost controlled contracts. And I don't know that I don't know that I trust the 49ers front office to fix the defensive line the way they need to. And I guess that gets separate from the Myles Garrett conversation because, to your point, at some point you have to draft good players. You can't just keep throwing money at it because there's a salary cap. So yeah. I understand all that. So I guess for me, shifting the conversation, I think if you're the 49ers, you have to treat the defensive line and the offensive lines the same way. And it's like, you have 10 picks, spend them all in the trenches. See what you can figure out. Because that's an issue here, man, where since, and even pre-Bosa, they took Bosa in 19, but before that, like Contavious Street and Julian Taylor and Solomon Thomas, and then DJ Jones. DJ Jones, a good player. But DJ Jones and Nick Bosa are the two good defensive linemen they've drafted. Like, they got to fit whatever they're doing to evaluate talent on the defensive line. They got to fix it because it's not working.
Yeah. And that's like, if I'm them and I'm looking at the draft history, I'm saying, all right, what went wrong with these picks and how can we fix that?
Mm-hmm.
My fix for them not being able to draft defensive linemen wouldn't be to stop drafting defensive linemen.
Yeah, sure.
So that's just my opinion. Like, and I totally get what you're saying. And like, look, like I said, if they get Myles Garrett and he's only on the team for 2 years and they get a Super Bowl out of it, it's absolutely worth it. But if it's, 2 first round picks and you're paying him at some point, it's just not tenable to have an aging roster where all your good players are 30 plus at making money at the top of the market. Like, at some point, as the Eagles just showed, you can build out a Super Bowl winning team where you have a bunch of dominant players on rookie contracts, which is what the Niners had in 2019.
Yeah. Man. The 23 draft is really bad. Honestly, the 22 draft wasn't good either. Oof.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they drafted Brock Purdy, which helps. And I know they didn't have first round picks after the Trey Lance trade, but man, they just whiffed big time on 2 consecutive draft classes. Yikes.
Yeah, which happens.
Yeah, but that's why. But yeah, and that's and that, I guess, to argue your point here, that's also why you need to be accumulating draft picks, or accumulating draft picks on your roster, because at some point you need to hit on a draft or you get like 4 or 5 contributors out of it, because you missed on so many in a row.
Yeah, even just like, I mean, any draft class long term that yields like two starters and like a core special teams guy is ultimately a success. Like,
Right.
you know, not if you were to do the full breakdown of like number of players drafted and of that number, how many are like good starters, I would think the number is like what, 10% or something. Like the vast majority of players drafted don't end up being good. So for the
Right.
Niners to draft, two All Pros in 2019. Andre Greenlaw, was Greenlaw ever an All Pro?
Never even made a Pro Bowl.
Okay, so I mean, still one of the best
But
linebackers in the league at his
yes,
peak.
yes, 1000%.
And then Fred Warner in 2018, George Kittle in 2017, fifth round picks. Like that is how you build a contending team, in my opinion. Particularly when you already have so many big contracts on the roster.
Yep.
Like, and that's not to say Myles Garrett wouldn't be a great addition. It's just in terms of the Niners wanting to be a team that wins, that's in the mix year after year after year. To me, it's like focus on finding a dude at 11, whether it's Trent Williams replacement at left tackle or, the next DeForest Buckner or Eric Armstead or, Micah Parsons. Like there, you have an opportunity at 11 to potentially draft an all pro caliber talent. And like that should be the focus because Myles Garrett, like Mike Sando had a good bit in his pick six after the Super Bowl talking about that the vast majority of all pro defensive linemen, when they get to like year 8 in their career, they decline. Some of them decline steadily, some of them decline substantially. I think Myles Garrett is probably even an outlier to that. But I would much rather have a young player ascending, a potential all pro on a rookie contract than a declining Myles Garrett. Because even a declining player, like I said, 17 game regular season, and you have to, if the Niners get the 2 seed and they don't get the first round bye, and you have to win the Super Bowl in the fourth quarter, and Myles Garrett is just out of gas because he played 1,500 snaps.
Sure.
Like it's not an ideal scenario. Is my point.
To now argue my point via your point. Let's say they pull the trigger and trade for Myles Garrett and trade their next 2 first round picks. I think it would take more than that, but just follow me for the sake of argument. The 25 and 26 first round picks. You still have to hit on other draft picks.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the bottom line here is the last couple of years we've been like, man, they really need this draft. They really need this draft. This is the one, man. Where even if you're giving up your first round pick to get Myles Garrett, that's great. But you need depth at defensive end. You need depth at defensive tackle. You got to figure out linebacker. You got to figure out safety. You got to figure out receiver. They have so many things outside of their pass rush, and I think Myles Garrett just jumps out to me so much because like that is the one-stop fix for everything that ails your pass rush. Is if you're getting Myles Garrett across from Nick Bosa with Malik Collins and a first-round pick at defensive tackle. And Jordan Elliott rotating in and Leonard Floyd rotating in, like all of a sudden
you're
you're
not
like,
going to have
crap.
a first round pick at defensive tackle though.
You're right. I'm sorry, a second round pick at defensive tackle. You're lining up your first pick in the draft at defensive tackle. Now all of a sudden you're like, hey, look at that! Oh my god! But on the other hand, we were talking with Nick Wagner, our favorite cast member, about this, and he had reservations about whether it would even work financially. And I mean, that's the end of the conversation. if the 49ers decide like, hey, we can't fit in a top of market defensive end long term, then the conversation's over. But regardless, whether they're using that pick to trade or they're drafting somebody with it, their first round pick has to be good.
I mean, if you trade for Myles Garrett, then that puts more pressure on all the other draft picks you have.
Yeah, for sure.
To your point. But like, you're going to have a quarterback who might not be at the top of the market, but he's going to be in the top 10, making $50 some odd million a year. Fred Warner, top of the market at linebacker. George Kittle, top of the market at tight end. Nick Bosa, top of the market at defensive end. You have Deebo Samuel potentially on a 20 or a $30 million dead cap number.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon Ayuk, top of the market at receiver. Like you are, it's going to be really, really difficult to swing this trade with Myles Garrett, potentially pay him, and then still have any sort of depth on your roster.
Sure.
So the point that they need to hit on their draft picks and draft good players stands sort of no matter what happens with Myles Garrett. We
Mm-hmm.
definitely agree on that. But I just think that it's such a difficult needle to thread to like have this thing be sustainable, because there's a world where it's like, all right, you get Myles Garrett and then you just kind of have the same season where like your aging roster, people get hurt and you have availability issues. And even if you somehow make your way into the playoffs, you're just like out of gas because the depth behind your good players isn't there. And it's such a slog that, you know, even if you do make the Super Bowl and you're going up against Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, like your dudes are out of gas because they're old and you're in your fourth playoff game. You know, like I don't know. The Niners need my overall thesis here is that the 49ers at some point need to go through a youth movement.
Sure. I can
And
probably
the Eagles are a relatively young team, and I think that was a big part of their win on Sunday.
I think we joke sometimes about everybody talking about how awesome Howie Roseman is. Howie Roseman's a very good GM. We just need to stop acting like every move he makes is God's gift to football. Because sometimes he doesn't.
Byard.
Kevin Byard. Oh my God. I don't know how the league let Howie do it. But the Eagles have been good and competitive for a long time because Howie Roseman is good. And you mentioned it. Cooper DeJean was a rookie. Quinyon Mitchell, rookie. Jordan Davis, third year, I think. Jalen Carter, second year. Nolan Smith, second year. They have a lot of dudes on their defense who are very recent draft picks. And it feels sometimes like the 49ers trying to outthink themselves when it comes to the draft.
Yeah.
And they start like digging super deep into whatever the I don't even know what to call it, not the draft board, but there's Howie Roseman's had a lot of luck being like good defender from Georgia, great, we'll take him. Or like really good defensive back from Iowa, great, we'll take him. He's super athletic and he can return kicks too, awesome, yeah, we'll take that guy. I think there's just a lot of there's a lot to be said for the simplicity of just, hey, is that guy good at football? Great, let's get him in the building and figure it out.
Yeah, the theme for me with the Eagles is that they just hit on all their picks. Milton Williams, third round pick, hit. Jordan Davis, hit. Jalen Carter, hit. Nolan Smith, hit. N'Kobe Dean, hit. Josh Sweat, hit. Like Cooper DeJean, hit. Like they just hit on all these picks.
Yep.
And I don't think we need to overcomplicate it and be like they need to, you know, rethink their philosophy and blah blah blah. It's like no, just draft good players. Stop missing on dudes. Like your philosophy is fine. Just be better at it.
Yep.
That's it.
All right.
John Lynch, I'm available for hire. Let me know.
We'll dive more into the draft as it gets closer. That's all I got for today.
I'm just going to pound the table, be like, stop missing on picks.
Just draft good players.
What are you guys doing?
No, I think sometimes I know the draft. I want to explain the draft good players thing real quick. I mean that from a standpoint of like they were good college players, not okay, well that guy wasn't super productive and he missed a whole year because of an injury, but love his arm length. The arm length is great and his get off at the line is super quick. Why don't you draft the guy who is really, really productive in the first round instead? Just do that instead.
This is the best example of this is Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
Like
productive college career.
Yeah. Pretty simple. And so, that said, like there are situations. I mean, we mentioned Trent Brown. Like there are situations where athleticism and tools, like there's definitely a balance to find there.
Yeah. Yes. There's no perfect way to draft.
Yeah. But yeah, to your point, like Cam Latu,
Come on,
like
man.
converted defensive end.
The hell are we doing?
There was no proof he could ever play tight end. It was entirely a projection. And turns out he's not any good. Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know, man.
They should just draft Ohio State guys. They'll be fine.
Dude, go Bucks.
All right, let's get out of here.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm just going to talk in circles for the rest of the night. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Candlestick Chronicles podcast. Search Candlestick Chronicles on YouTube. We're there. We're also available wherever you get your podcasts. That's it. Goodbye, everyone.
See you, everybody.